At the end of this month, parts of the 2018 Farm Bill are set to expire. It has been extended twice, but that would mean that many farmers won't see any federal dollars until President Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill kicks in late next year.
Hundreds of farmers in Arkansas gathered at a town hall last week to ask Congress for help. Mounting debt, aging equipment, and disappearing profits are making it nearly impossible for them to break even, let alone to turn a profit.
Headlines concerning ag-related bankruptcies are on the rise.
Farmland here in the Midwest is abundant, with farmers growing corn, soybeans, alfalfa, dairy, and beef.
Tell me about what's happening with your farm.
Well, we've got a real disaster with this tariff deal. I mean, we produce 40% more agricultural products in this country than we can consume domestically. 1 in every 4 rows of soybeans in every field in the entire United States of America has to go abroad.
This is more than a trade story. This is the unraveling of a promise and the breaking point for farmers across the nation. It began with bravado. Tariffs, Donald Trump declared, would make America win again. Other countries had been cheating, he said, taking advantage of the United States for decades. But no more. By slapping tariffs on imports, by raising costs on foreign goods, America would finally take back control. Factories would boom, jobs would return, farmers would prosper. That was the vision. That was the sales pitch. But on the ground, in the soil of Iowa, the dairy barns of Wisconsin, the cotton fields of Texas, and the soybean rows of Illinois, the vision didn't match reality. Farmers who had counted on stable exports saw their markets vanish almost overnight. Grain shipments bound for China were canceled. Contracts in Mexico dried up. Canada, once a close partner, pushed back with tariffs of its own. The very system that kept American agriculture alive, global markets, international buyers, and steady demand, collapsed under the weight of the bluff. Let's take a closer look at one farmer's story. John, a third-generation soybean farmer in Iowa, had always believed in hard work and fair trade. His land wasn't vast, but it was enough to provide for his family. He took out loans to buy new equipment, betting on steady prices and stable exports. But when tariffs hit, everything changed. China, his biggest buyer, turned to Brazil. His soybeans sat unsold. His debt piled up. John applied for emergency aid, but the payments came late, and they weren't enough. By the end of the season, he faced bankruptcy. His story is not unique. It is multiplied by thousands across the Midwest. Meanwhile, Washington spoke of toughness. Officials claimed the tariffs were working, that America was gaining leverage. But in farm country, leverage didn't put food on the table. Families held auctions to sell equipment passed down through generations. Small-town banks struggled under waves of loan defaults. Churches prayed for relief. And all the while, foreign competitors seized the opportunity. Brazil and Argentina shipped soybeans to China. Australia expanded beef exports. The European Union cut new trade deals. The world moved on, leaving American farmers behind. The pain wasn't just financial, it was psychological. Farmers had long seen themselves as the backbone of America, resilient, independent, proud. They believed in promises of protection, but the tariffs turned that pride into despair. They felt abandoned, used as pawns in a game that had no winners in sight. The farm crisis became a human crisis. Marriages strained under financial stress. Young people left small towns, chasing stability elsewhere. Communities hollowed out. And yet, in political speeches, the rhetoric continued. The tariffs, they said, were temporary pain for permanent gain. But how long can a farmer wait? A season? 2 seasons? When the land doesn't forgive missed payments, when the bank doesn't forgive missed loans, temporary pain becomes permanent loss. Farms sold at auction don't come back. Once a buyer switches to Brazil, they don't easily return to Iowa. Once confidence is lost, it is not quickly restored. The collapse of U.S. agriculture exports is not a statistic. It is the dismantling of a way of life. The longer the tariffs stayed in place, the clearer the fallout became. Farmers weren't just losing money, they were losing markets, trust, and time. The 3 things that sustain agriculture. Markets take years to build. Trust is earned over decades of reliability. And time. Time is unforgiving in farming. Miss a season, and you can't just get it back. The soil waits for no man, and neither does the global economy. In Washington, leaders painted a picture of strength. They said America was finally standing up for itself, finally using its power. But the view from the fields was different. For farmers, tariffs looked less like power and more like punishment. Each month, the pressure mounted. Cattle prices fluctuated wildly. Soybean contracts evaporated. Dairy farmers poured milk into ditches because they had nowhere to sell it. And all the while, bills stacked higher. Let's go to Wisconsin. Dairy farms here have long been the pride of America, producing cheese and milk that reach tables worldwide. But in 2019 and 2020, dairy bankruptcies hit record levels. Families who had worked the land for generations were forced to auction their cows, close barns, and leave the business altogether. Tariffs weren't the only problem. The industry was already struggling, but they were the tipping point. International buyers turned to Europe, Canada, and New Zealand. Once lost, those contracts didn't return. For Wisconsin, the dairy state, the tariff war felt like the final blow in a decades-long decline. Travel south to Texas, and the story shifts to cotton. Cotton growers rely heavily on exports, particularly to China. When tariffs shut those doors, warehouses filled with unsold bales. Some farmers tried to store their cotton, hoping for better prices next season. Others sold at a loss, just to keep cash flowing. But hope doesn't pay interest. Loans came due. Equipment payments couldn't be delayed. Families who had weathered droughts and floods found themselves broken by policy. Across the Midwest, soybean farmers suffered most of all. Before tariffs, China bought more than half of America's soybeans. That market collapsed almost instantly. Brazil rushed in, expanding production and locking down deals. Ships that once left American ports now sailed from South America. And Chinese buyers, once dependable partners, formed new loyalties. That shift may last for decades. The United States didn't just lose sales, it lost its reputation as the world's most reliable supplier. And then there's Canada, America's closest neighbor and largest trading partner. Tariffs strained even this relationship. Canada responded with tariffs of its own, hitting U.S. farmers and manufacturers in return. What was once a partnership built on trust turned into tit-for-tat retaliation. For farmers near the border, who had long sold goods north, the collapse of that trade was devastating. Small trucking companies closed. Grain elevators shut down. Families who relied on cross-border trade saw their incomes vanish. The collapse of agriculture rippled outward. Equipment dealers, John Deere, Case IH, and local shops saw orders dry up. Repair shops closed their doors. Seed and fertilizer companies lost clients. Even rural diners, the heart of many small towns, grew quiet as farmers cut back on spending. An agricultural crisis is never isolated to the farm. It drags down entire rural economies with it. Washington attempted to cushion the blow with subsidies, billions in emergency aid packages designed to keep farmers afloat. But aid checks don't restore lost markets. They don't rebuild trust with buyers overseas. They don't guarantee the next generation a future on the land. To many farmers, the aid felt like hush money, an attempt to buy patience as the tariff war dragged on. But patience wore thin. Farmers don't want government handouts. They want fair markets, stable trade, and the dignity of earning from their work. And so the backlash grew. At first, it was quiet grumbling, frustration whispered at kitchen tables. But as months turned to years, it became louder. Farmers spoke to reporters. They confronted politicians at town halls. They demanded answers. Why were they suffering while the promised benefits never arrived? Why were they asked to sacrifice when no relief seemed in sight? In Iowa, a farmer stood at a rally and shouted, "We're not winning. We're losing everything." His voice cracked with desperation, but it echoed the feelings of thousands. In Wisconsin, a dairy farmer told a local news station, "We don't need checks. We need markets. We need buyers. Without that, this farm dies." And in Illinois, a soybean farmer admitted, "I voted for Trump. I believed him. But now I feel betrayed. I don't know how much longer I can hold on." These are not abstract debates. These are lives, families, generations, and each auction sign hammered into a farmyard marks another failure of policy. As frustration spread, so did anger toward the political system itself. Farmers who had once trusted Washington began to lose faith entirely. They saw politicians making speeches while their barns stood empty. They watched aid packages get tied up in bureaucracy while their bills went unpaid. The sense of betrayal deepened. It wasn't just about Trump anymore. It was about a system that seemed willing to gamble with their survival. By the second year of tariffs, rural America was in turmoil. Suicide hotlines for farmers reported record calls. Mental health counselors in small towns were overwhelmed. Churches organized food drives for farm families. A tragic irony, when the people who feed the nation couldn't feed themselves. The bluff had backfired. The tariffs had failed to bring foreign rivals to their knees. Instead, they brought America's farmers to theirs. And still, the political spin continued. Washington insisted victory was just around the corner. Deals were close, they said. Sacrifice would soon pay off. But in the fields, hope was gone. Farmers aren't gamblers. They can't wait for maybe they live season to season, year to year. And for many, time had already run out. The bluff wasn't just failing, it was collapsing under its own weight. The deeper the tariffs dug into the economy, the clearer the fractures became. It wasn't just farmers bearing the weight, it was truckers, dock workers, processors, even the small-town diners that lived off the rhythm of farm incomes. Rural America was unraveling, thread by thread. And every unraveling thread revealed the same truth. The promises of prosperity were illusions. The bluff was collapsing, and the fallout was spreading faster than anyone in Washington wanted to admit. At the ports, silence grew where there had once been constant motion. Grain elevators sat full, barges sat idle. Truckers who had long hauled soybeans to the Mississippi watched their contracts evaporate. Dock workers found themselves waiting for ships that never arrived. Tariffs weren't just shutting down farms, they were shutting down entire arteries of trade. And so the story closes where it began, on the shoulders of American farmers, truckers, and families who carried the weight of promises that never paid off. Fields stand silent, barns stand empty, and futures once certain now hang in doubt. The cost of tariffs wasn't measured in numbers alone. It was measured in trust, in survival, in the very backbone of this nation. This is more than politics. This is the story of America's heartland, left to wonder if the sacrifice was ever worth it. If you believe these stories must be told, if you want to keep uncovering the truth behind the headlines, make sure to hit that subscribe button to Traveling Vibes, because the journey doesn't end here. Together, we'll keep shining light on the stories that matter most.